A secret born from illness, sacrifice, and a love that never let go. What happens next will test loyalty, break silence, and expose the heart's deepest wounds. Stay with us until the end, because some truths don't scream, they whisper. Andrew Coleman had lost track of how many nights he had spent pacing the nursery floor, whispering words of comfort that meant nothing to the child in his arms. Liam writhed in his embrace, his tiny fists clenched, his face red from relentless sobbing. Nothing worked, not the bottle, not the pacifier, not the lullabies recommended by half a dozen therapists. His cries weren't just sounds. They were a constant reminder that something was wrong, that love and money and effort still weren't enough. Andrew was exhausted in ways he couldn't articulate, not physically, but in his bones, in that quiet place where grief and guilt live and don't let you breathe. Rebecca had been the one who wanted a baby. He agreed to the adoption because he wanted her to feel complete, because he loved her, because he thought they'd face it together. But now she was gone, and he was alone with a child that did not come from him, did not respond to him, and did not seem to want him. There was nothing more painful than holding a child who cried harder every time you tried to soothe him. And in those moments, Andrew couldn't help but wonder if Liam knew somehow, if he sensed he didn't belong to this man. It was past midnight when Andrew sat down again in the rocking chair beside the crib, letting his head fall into his hand. He hadn't changed out of the suit he wore to a board meeting 14 hours earlier. There had been 3 nannies in as many weeks, each one leaving with shaking heads and apologetic eyes. They couldn't handle it, couldn't handle him. A bottle of formula, untouched, sat on the dresser. Liam's cries were softer now, not because he was calm, but because he was losing strength. His throat had grown hoarse. Andrew had called the pediatrician twice that week, begging for a different answer, a better strategy, anything that would stop this endless unraveling. But they always said the same thing: give it time. He had given it time. And now time felt like it was giving him nothing but the slow unraveling of his sanity. He wanted to be enough. He had built skyscrapers, negotiated multi-million-dollar deals, stood toe-to-toe with Wall Street sharks, but nothing in his world of contracts and power taught him how to be a father. And especially not to a child who came into his life as an agreement, a beautiful, innocent, fragile agreement, now left motherless, voiceless, comfortless. Andrew never imagined that becoming a father would feel like failure on repeat. Meanwhile, across town, Emily Carter checked her reflection in the mirror of a borrowed bathroom, adjusting the wig she hated. It never sat quite right. The synthetic strands didn't fall naturally, but they did their job. They hid the bare truth of her battle, the bald head that spoke too loudly of where she'd been. She was cancer-free now, months out of treatment, but the fear hadn't left. Neither had the shame or the longing. Her fingers hesitated over the final button on her coat before she stepped outside, a folder tucked under her arm. It held her new resume, a simplified version of who she was. No mention of the baby she had given up 3 months after diagnosis. No mention of the night she signed the adoption papers with hands trembling from chemo. And definitely no mention of the reason she had applied for a job in the Coleman estate. No one knew that the child crying behind those massive walls was her son. She had spent weeks confirming it, cross-referencing dates, agencies, and names. Rebecca Coleman had adopted a baby boy through a private agency that handled discrete cases. And now, Emily would walk into that house as the help, just to see him, to be near him, to exist in his orbit, even if he never knew who she really was. The ride to the estate had been silent. Emily had rehearsed dozens of answers to questions she might be asked. What made you leave teaching? Health reasons. Why housekeeping? It's steady, and I need the work. Do you have experience with children? A faint smile and a humble nod. Yes, I've cared for many. Lies wrapped in truth, or maybe truths shaped to survive. She wasn't trying to deceive anyone. She just wanted to be close to the child she had never stopped loving. As the driver pulled up to the gates of the Coleman mansion, Emily felt the trembles start in her chest. She exhaled slowly, anchoring herself in resolve. She would clean floors. She would carry laundry. She would keep her voice down and eyes low. But she would not leave until she saw him. When the door opened and she stepped into the foyer, no one paid much attention to her. Staff came and went in houses like this all the time. But Emily noticed everything. The sound of a baby crying upstairs, the silence of grief that lived in the air, and the man who passed her in the hallway without a glance, his shoulders bowed, his steps too heavy for someone so young. Andrew hadn't looked twice at the new hire. When the agency said they were sending someone to help with cleaning, he barely acknowledged it. His life had become a blur of needs he couldn't meet and decisions he didn't care about. But that night, as he paced the nursery again, Liam's cries took on a new kind of desperation. The baby refused to be held. Andrew tried pacing, swaying, whispering, but nothing worked. At one point, Liam's little face turned a disturbing shade of red, and panic clawed at Andrew's throat. He stumbled downstairs, past the staff kitchen, searching for help. It was nearly 2 a.m. Only one person was still awake. Emily, wiping down a counter slowly, almost meditatively. She looked up when she saw him. Her eyes flicked to the baby in his arms, and something unreadable passed through her face. Andrew didn't notice. "He won't stop," he said hoarsely. Can you try holding him, just for a second?" Emily froze. She hadn't prepared for this moment. Not so soon. Not like this. But then Liam turned toward her, his eyes swollen, breath hiccuping. An instinct overpowered caution. She reached out and cradled him. And just like that, the cries stopped. Liam looked up at her, his chest still heaving, but calmer. Then, astonishingly, a sound no one had ever heard came from his lips, a soft, gurgled chuckle, the ghost of a laugh. His little hand reached toward her wig, pulled clumsily, and before she could stop him, the synthetic hair came loose. Emily's bare scalp was exposed. She gasped, instinctively turning away, but Andrew saw. His eyes widened. The moment held its breath. I can explain," Emily stammered, voice barely audible. But before she could say anything else, Liam did something extraordinary. He giggled, clear, bright. The kind of sound that shakes something loose in your chest. Then he touched her head gently, as if recognizing something no one else could. As if saying, "I know you." Andrew didn't speak, couldn't. All he could do was stare at the baby, who had never smiled before, and the woman holding him like she'd done it 1,000 times. He didn't know what it meant. He didn't know why this was happening. But in that moment, something in the very foundation of his life began to shift. And none of them had any idea just how much that 1 second would change everything. Emily had kept her distance since that night. She'd been careful not to cross invisible lines, working quietly, avoiding the nursery unless instructed otherwise. After that surreal moment when Liam had calmed in her arms and pulled off her wig, she feared she'd overstepped. Andrew hadn't said much. He'd taken Liam back without a word, his face unreadable. Emily went back to her duties, folding laundry with trembling fingers and forcing herself not to listen for the sound of Liam's cries. But they came anyway, every hour, every day. No one could console him. The new nanny, who had arrived just a day later, couldn't get through a single feeding without the baby wailing like he was being hurt. Emily saw it all from the sidelines. She'd pause in hallways listening, torn between doing her job and surrendering to the ache in her chest. She hadn't planned on holding him that night, hadn't planned on staying more than a few weeks, just enough to see him. But now the part of her that was still a mother, the part that never stopped being a mother, was unraveling under the weight of silence and restraint. And no one noticed. No one except perhaps the child himself. Andrew, for his part, had spent the past few days buried in a discomfort he couldn't name. Something had shifted, but he didn't understand what. Liam had shown something, a spark, a reaction, that night in Emily's arms that Andrew hadn't seen before. But how could he justify trusting it? He didn't even know this woman, and yet the memory wouldn't leave him. The laugh, that soft, stunned laugh. He had clung to it in the days that followed, even while trying to convince himself it was nothing. Maybe it had been a fluke, a nervous reflex. Babies made noises. That's what the pediatrician had said when he called to ask. "You said he laughed?" the doctor had asked, surprised. "Well, that's good news." But Andrew wasn't convinced it was good. It was confusing. It made him question things. His instincts, his decisions, the story he thought he knew about the life he had agreed to build with Rebecca. Every time he walked past Emily, he felt a tug of unease, like she carried an answer to a question he hadn't dared ask yet. She didn't seek him out. She didn't try to explain, and somehow that made him even more suspicious and more curious. On the fourth morning after that night, Andrew was passing by the nursery again, distracted by an early phone call with legal counsel about Rebecca's estate. He had barely slept, and his tie hung loose around his neck, forgotten. His fingers moved to the doorknob out of habit, not intention. But the moment he heard silence, actual silence, he froze. No crying, not even whimpering. It had been weeks, and this was the first time he'd walked by that door without hearing his son's distress. His heart picked up speed, part panic, part disbelief. He pushed the door open with more force than he meant to. What he saw inside made him forget the phone in his hand. Liam was in Emily's arms again. She was seated on the carpet, barefoot, humming softly, almost subconsciously, and the baby, for the first time since he had entered this house, looked at peace. Not just calm, but content. His mouth curled in a soft smile as he reached for the strands of Emily's wig. She flinched instinctively, but didn't move away in time. Liam's tiny fingers gripped the edge and tugged. The wig slid off, exposing the pale skin of her bare scalp to the room once again. Emily's face flooded with horror. She grabbed for the wig, her fingers shaking, her eyes darting toward the door, toward him. For a moment, she looked like someone on the edge of being caught in a lie she hadn't even told yet. "Mr. Coleman," she whispered, her voice cracking. I can explain." But the baby, oblivious to her panic, giggled, loud and clear. A sharp, sweet sound that cut through every assumption in the room. Then Liam reached up again, not for the wig, but for her head. He touched her scalp gently, like he remembered it somehow. His fingers lingered, soft and curious, and he laughed again. A brighter laugh, a real laugh. Emily's face crumbled, not in shame, but in something deeper. Grief, relief, wonder. She didn't try to stop him. She just held him closer, biting down hard on the inside of her cheek to keep the emotion from spilling out. She didn't know what Andrew was thinking. She didn't dare look at him. The world had narrowed down to Liam, to his breath against her collarbone, to the sound of that miraculous joy coming from a child who had never laughed before. Andrew stood frozen, unable to process what he was seeing. His mind tried to analyze it, rationalize it, but his heart was already somewhere else, far ahead, sprinting toward a conclusion he wasn't ready for. The child in front of him wasn't just reacting to comfort, it wasn't random. This wasn't coincidence. There was recognition there, familiarity, an intimacy that made no sense on paper. He watched Liam giggle, then reach up again to pat Emily's face, as if claiming her, as if saying, "You are mine." And in that moment, Andrew felt something buckle in his chest. This wasn't the woman who had come to dust furniture and clean floors. She was something else entirely. The way she cradled Liam, like muscle memory, like love. The way Liam responded, as if something in his little heart had been waiting for her to return. Andrew didn't speak. He didn't move. He didn't even know what question to ask. But in that instant, some fragile thread was spun between the three of them, stretched across a space none of them could yet define. Days later, Andrew would still remember the way Liam's laughter sounded, light, pure, untethered, as the baby clutched a stranger's scalp like it was the most familiar thing in the world. But in that first suspended moment, as he stood at the nursery door, he understood only one thing with absolute clarity. This was no ordinary connection. Something about this woman, this Emily Carter, held the key to a part of Liam he had never been able to reach. And he had no idea what it meant or what to do with it. All he knew was that for the first time since Rebecca died, the house wasn't filled with grief. It was filled with a sound so rare, so shocking, it rooted him to the floor. His son was laughing in someone else's arms. And Andrew Coleman, the man who had everything, had never felt more unprepared for what came next. Andrew found himself watching her more often than he intended. It wasn't deliberate at first, just passing glances, pauses in conversation, quiet observations during the mundane flow of the day. But as the days wore on, he realized it was becoming a pattern. Emily Carter wasn't like anyone the agency had ever sent before. She didn't flinch when Liam screamed. She didn't rush to hand him off when he squirmed or sobbed. She moved with a calm, almost maternal patience, cradling him against her as if she understood that his cries weren't demands. They were grief. She hummed lullabies Andrew didn't recognize, melodies that seemed to rise from memory rather than training. There was something in her presence that Liam clung to. He wouldn't eat unless she sat nearby. He refused to be held by anyone else, even Andrew, if Emily was in the room. And Andrew, who once might have bristled at being pushed aside, didn't. Instead, he found himself listening to her voice, to the way she said the baby's name softly, as if it meant more to her than it should. He couldn't name what unsettled him, only that every time she soothed Liam, it looked less like coincidence and more like fate. Emily was careful not to let her guard slip. She didn't linger when she didn't need to. She never initiated conversation. And yet every time she touched Liam, something in her threatened to crack wide open. The lullabies she sang weren't random. They were the same ones her mother had sung to her during hospital nights, songs she clung to like lifelines when the nausea from chemo turned her inside out. She remembered those nights too vividly. The sterile lights, the thin blankets, the scent of antiseptic and fear. She had carried Liam inside her during those months, whispering apologies to her unborn child between rounds of chemotherapy. She remembered pressing her hands to her stomach and promising him he'd live, even if it meant she'd never get to see him again. And when she finally signed the adoption papers, shaking, crying, hair already beginning to fall out, she had believed she was doing the right thing. He would be safe. He would be loved. She had no idea that love might come with conditions, or that safety might look like a mansion filled with grief. Now, in this house, under this name, she held him again, but with borrowed hands. She was a stranger to her own son. The hardest part wasn't pretending she didn't care. It was pretending she hadn't cared first. Every time Liam looked at her with those wide, searching eyes, she wondered if he remembered her heartbeat from inside the womb. She liked to believe he did. He clung to her like he knew her, like he had been waiting for her. And while Andrew didn't say much, Emily could feel his gaze on her more and more often. He wasn't just watching Liam. He was studying her, trying to figure out who she was, what made her different. There were moments when she thought he might ask outright. His expression would soften, his mouth would part slightly, like he was on the edge of some realization. But he never said it, not yet. So she kept her answers brief, kept her secrets closer than ever. She didn't dare tell him the truth. Not until she knew he wouldn't take Liam away again, because that was her greatest fear, not being fired, not being exposed, but being removed from the child she had already lost once. It would kill her to lose him again now, especially when he had just started to laugh, just started to rest his head on her chest as if it belonged there. Andrew wasn't a man prone to softness. The years had sculpted him into someone decisive, structured, and painfully composed. But in the past few days, that composure had been peeling back. Watching Emily with Liam did something to him he hadn't expected. It made him feel unnecessary, but not in a bad way. It reminded him of Rebecca, how she had longed for a child so deeply that she cried the day the adoption was finalized. He had gone along with it because she wanted it. And yes, eventually, he had wanted it too. But now, seeing Emily's quiet strength, her instinctive patience, he began to realize how little he had understood what motherhood could look like. There was something in Emily that felt earned, forged in something hard and painful, not just inherited. She never asked for recognition. She never acted like she was owed anything, and yet every time Liam reached for her, Andrew felt like he was witnessing something ancient, some invisible thread that bound them. He didn't know how to name it. He didn't want to speculate, but something in him whispered, "This is more than luck." This wasn't just a good nanny, this was something else, something deeper. Emily knew she was playing a dangerous game. Every moment she spent holding Liam chipped away at the lie by omission. Every kiss on his forehead felt both like a gift and a theft. She should have left the second he laughed for her. But how could she? How could she walk away now that he smiled when she walked into the room? How could she pretend she hadn't heard him babble the first consonants that weren't cries? And how could she forget the way he fell asleep on her shoulder, like he belonged there, like she had always been his place of peace? She told herself she would find the right time to explain, that when the time came, she'd tell Andrew the truth, that she had signed those papers with her heart breaking, that she had watched Liam's birth certificate change names while holding onto the one photograph of him they allowed her to keep. But not yet, not while the bond between them was still so fragile. She couldn't risk losing him, not again. So she held on in silence, smiling softly when Andrew passed by, pretending to be just the help, even while every fiber of her body screamed, "I am his mother." As Liam bonds with Emily, Andrew begins to notice her patience, the lullabies she hums, the way his son calms only when she is near. Beneath her modesty lies a quiet strength born of suffering. Emily remembers hospital nights when she carried Liam inside her while poison dripped into her veins. She had signed away her rights, believing it was the only way to save him. Now she is back in his life under a different name, hiding the truth even as the bond between them deepens. From the moment Emily stepped into the Coleman household, Nurse Linda had tolerated her with the cold, polite indifference reserved for people who were clearly temporary. At first, she hadn't even registered her as a threat. Just another name on the long list of household hires Andrew barely noticed. But things changed quickly, almost imperceptibly, and Linda began to see what others didn't, the way Liam quieted when Emily entered a room, how his eyes followed her, how his fingers curled tighter around her shirt than they ever did around a bottle. And Andrew, he might have been too polite to say it, but Linda noticed his eyes lingered longer now. His questions for Emily grew more frequent, his silences more thoughtful when she spoke. It didn't take long for a bitter taste to rise in the back of Linda's throat. She had stayed after Rebecca's death not just out of duty, but out of belief that grief had created space for something new. She had comforted Andrew during his darkest nights, tended to Liam like he was her own. And yet here was this stranger, soft-spoken and wide-eyed, slipping into both their lives as if she belonged. Linda felt something in her curdle. She had waited too long to be replaced so quietly. The jealousy didn't hit her all at once. It crept in. The first time was when she walked in on Emily singing to Liam while folding his clothes. There was nothing overtly wrong with it. Emily hadn't even noticed she was being watched. But something about the way she sang, the care with which she folded the onesie, the kiss she brushed against Liam's head, it felt personal, too personal. Linda said nothing, but her mind began to twist it. Then came the afternoon when Andrew walked into the nursery and smiled just because Liam had giggled in Emily's arms. Linda had spent months in that house, pouring herself into that baby, enduring the weight of grief with Andrew. Never once had he looked at her like that, like someone bringing light into the room. So she began to ask questions in private, discreet ones. She called a contact at the agency that sent Emily. "Is she fully cleared to be around infants?" she asked casually. "She had cancer, right? You sure that's all in the past?" The voice on the other end hesitated. Not a full confirmation, not a full denial, just enough uncertainty for Linda to begin weaving a story, one that felt close enough to the truth to be dangerous. At first, she only shared her concerns with one or two staff members. A quiet word while waiting for coffee, a sigh of uncertainty as she looked toward the nursery. "She's sweet, isn't she?" Linda would say. "Though I do wonder if she's strong enough. I mean, chemo takes a toll, right? I heard it can come back without warning. No accusation, just an idea planted. But in a house like that, with staff constantly rotating, all it took was a whisper." Soon, Emily noticed the shift. Conversations with other maids ended quicker when she walked into the room. One of the groundskeepers, usually kind, averted his eyes when she passed. Even the cook, who had complimented her banana bread only a week earlier, now seemed too busy to chat. Emily didn't confront anyone. She had been an outsider before. She knew what suspicion felt like. But it stung differently this time, because this time she wasn't hiding shame. She was hiding truth. A truth that could cost her everything if someone decided to dig too deep. Still, she didn't retaliate, didn't defend herself. Instead, she kept singing to Liam, kept folding his clothes, kept pretending she couldn't feel the walls around her growing colder. Andrew was the last to notice it, though not for lack of signs. At first, he thought he was imagining it, a vague tension in the room when he entered while Emily was there, the way Linda's tone shifted whenever Emily's name came up, measured, clipped, a touch too concerned. One night, after a particularly rough day, Linda sat with him in the library under the pretense of reviewing Liam's sleeping schedule. Instead, the conversation drifted. "I've just been thinking," she said carefully, "about Emily." Andrew, distracted by spreadsheets on his tablet, didn't look up. "What about her?" Linda hesitated, then leaned forward slightly, lowering her voice. "It's nothing definite, but don't you think it's strange how quickly Liam got attached to her? I mean, we don't know that much about her. She had cancer, didn't she? That's what the agency said. But was she cleared by a doctor, completely?" That caught his attention. He looked up slowly. "You think she's still sick?" Linda held up her hands. "I'm not saying that. I'm just saying, maybe we should be cautious. We both care about Liam, and I'd hate for any risks to be overlooked." Andrew didn't respond immediately, but the seed was planted. Doubt, like a hairline crack in glass, began to spread. The next few days were marked by subtle shifts in Andrew's behavior. He didn't avoid Emily, but he didn't linger anymore either. Conversations were shorter, his tone more guarded. He began reviewing household files, rechecking Emily's employment application, wondering why he hadn't asked more questions from the start. Had he been too trusting? Too emotionally affected by what he saw in the nursery? He told himself he was only being prudent, responsible. But the truth was harder to admit. He was afraid that the one person who brought peace to his son might be a danger in disguise. Emily sensed the distance instantly. She noticed how his eyes no longer met hers for long, how he no longer asked how Liam had napped, how Linda hovered more often, always finding excuses to be nearby. And Emily, who had once dared to hope that something in this house was finally healing, now found herself bracing for another kind of loss. Not sudden like before, but slow, creeping. The kind of loss that doesn't tear things apart all at once, but wears them down until nothing remains. She continued to sing to Liam, still held him with aching devotion, but she could feel the clock ticking in every glance, every hesitation. Nurse Linda watches from the doorway, her heart hardening with jealousy. She has been at Andrew's side since Rebecca's death, nurturing a secret hope of becoming more than a caretaker. Seeing a stranger steal the child's affection, and perhaps Andrew's, ignites a quiet war. Rumors start to circulate that Emily's cancer might not be gone, that she's dangerous near a newborn. Doubt seeps into the mansion's walls as Andrew starts to question what he cannot explain. Andrew didn't make the decision lightly. In fact, he barely slept the night before. Every time Liam's cries echoed down the hallway, he felt a strange pull in his chest, a conflict between what he feared and what he couldn't explain. Linda's warnings had settled deep into his mind. Her concerns, spoken with the gravity of someone who had been there since the beginning, made him question his own judgment. He kept replaying her words. What if she relapses? What if the baby gets too attached to someone who can't stay? And wasn't that a real danger? Hadn't he already lost Rebecca and barely survived it? What if Liam bonded too deeply with someone who could disappear without warning? The thought terrified him. So, late one morning, he asked Emily to meet him in the living room. She walked in, wiping her hands on her apron, her eyes tired but warm, hopeful even. Andrew didn't meet her gaze at first. He focused on the edge of the fireplace, the stack of books she'd helped organize days ago. Emily, he said finally, voice low, I think, for now, it's best if you keep some distance from Liam. Her smile faltered instantly, but she nodded. I understand, she whispered. Emily didn't ask for clarification. She didn't plead or protest. She returned quietly to her duties, folding towels and wiping counters, pretending not to hear Liam's cries drifting from the nursery. The sound shredded her. Every sob, every gasp for air between screams was a piece of her heart being pulled apart, but she didn't interfere. She forced herself to scrub harder, to organize deeper, to fill her hours so completely there would be no space for grief. Still, at night, she lay awake in the staff quarters, fists clenched in the sheets, waiting for silence that never truly came. She knew Andrew was scared, and she didn't blame him. The tragedy of losing Rebecca had scarred him in ways only time could mend. But Liam, her Liam, didn't understand grief or fear. He only knew she wasn't there anymore, and he was waiting for her. The other staff noticed the shift too. They saw the red around her eyes, the stiffness in her smile. No one mentioned it aloud, but something in the rhythm of the house changed. As if everyone sensed a storm building, one that wasn't outside but inside the walls. Quiet, slow, devastating. The new nanny arrived that Friday. Sandra, in her mid-40s with 2 degrees, a firm handshake, and a thick folder of credentials. Linda introduced her with practiced pride, emphasizing Sandra's experience with high-profile families, her calm demeanor, her no-nonsense approach. Andrew shook her hand, grateful for her confidence, hoping professionalism would succeed where instinct had failed him. Sandra took to the nursery like a soldier, precise, prepared, methodical. But Liam recoiled from the start. The moment she lifted him, he screamed so loudly Andrew dropped his coffee. Sandra tried singing. He screamed louder. She tried feeding him. He slapped the bottle away. She tried rocking him. He arched his back until his face turned crimson. It wasn't tantrum behavior. It was panic. Pure, relentless panic. And it didn't stop. Over the next 2 days, Liam cried himself hoarse. He refused food, slept only in 30-minute bursts, waking in terrified gasps. Sandra did everything by the book, but Liam didn't care about books. He cared that the only arms he trusted were gone, and no one could replace them. Andrew watched helplessly, rubbing his temples as Sandra gave her hourly updates with apologetic glances. "Some babies just have a hard time adjusting," she said. "Maybe he needs more time." By Sunday night, Liam had grown frighteningly pale. His cries, once loud enough to shake windows, had softened into raspy whimpers. He lay in his crib, staring at the ceiling, arms limp, lips dry. Emily, from the hallway, passed by just once and caught a glimpse of him through the half-closed door. It took everything in her not to break down. He didn't look like the baby she'd held, laughed with, rocked to sleep. He looked like a child unraveling from the inside out. That night, Andrew sat beside the crib and gently pressed a wet cloth to Liam's forehead. "Come on, buddy," he whispered. "You've got to eat something. You've got to hold on." But Liam didn't respond, just blinked slowly, eyes clouded. That was the moment Andrew's fear overtook his pride. He called the pediatrician. Within 30 minutes, they were in the car, Andrew driving with one hand while cradling Liam in the other, his stomach twisted in dread. At the hospital, doctors ran tests, checked vitals, examined the fragile infant with professional urgency. Then one doctor, a woman in her 50s with gentle eyes, asked Andrew if there had been any recent changes in the baby's environment. "Yes," he admitted, "we changed caregivers." The diagnosis came quickly: emotional trauma due to abrupt separation from a bonded maternal figure. The words stunned Andrew. "You mean he's this sick just because she stopped holding him?" The doctor nodded. "Infants form attachments, especially when one person becomes their source of comfort. Losing that presence suddenly can cause emotional and physical distress. It's not uncommon, but in this case, the bond may have been unusually deep." Andrew leaned back in the hospital chair, staring at the IV line in his son's tiny arm. It didn't make sense. Or maybe it made too much sense. All the pieces that had seemed vague before, Liam's piece around Emily, the way he reached for her, the way she looked at him, clicked into place. This wasn't about a good nanny. This was something else, something deeper, and he had broken it. Linda's warnings, the doubts, his fears, they all felt hollow now. Nothing mattered except the boy in that hospital bed. Andrew swallowed hard and pulled out his phone. His fingers shook as he found Emily's number. He stared at it for a moment before pressing call. "Come to the hospital," he said when she picked up. "Now, please. He needs you." In the sterile glow of a hospital room, Andrew faces a diagnosis he never imagined. His son is in emotional shock from separation from the only person he sees as a mother. Emily didn't waste a second. The moment she hung up with Andrew, she grabbed her coat and ran. She didn't even change out of her uniform. She arrived at the hospital breathless, her heart hammering, her mind spiraling with worst-case scenarios. At the front desk, the nurse barely finished asking for ID before Emily said, "I was called. I'm here for Liam Coleman. Please." The urgency in her voice made the woman nod silently and wave her through. Emily's shoes echoed against the linoleum as she reached the room, and the second her eyes landed on Liam, pale, listless, too quiet for a baby, her heart shattered. Andrew stood by the crib, shoulders slumped in exhaustion and defeat. When he saw her, he didn't speak. He just stepped aside. Emily moved closer, her voice shaky but determined, as she began to hum the familiar tune she used to sing when Liam was in her womb. It was almost instinct. That melody. Low, soothing, intimate. Within seconds, Liam's little fists unclenched. His eyes fluttered. And then, slowly, like a miracle unfolding in real time, he smiled. A faint, sleepy smile. Emily sat in the chair beside him and kept humming until he drifted into the first peaceful sleep he'd had in days. Andrew stared at her like he was seeing something he couldn't explain. His hand brushed his jaw, eyes never leaving the crib. "How did you do that?" he asked finally, his voice quieter than usual, stripped of its usual authority. Emily looked at him, her mouth trembling. She opened it, then closed it again, then finally exhaled. "I can't lie anymore," she said, her tone barely more than a whisper. "Not after this." Andrew furrowed his brow but said nothing, sensing something was unraveling that required silence, not interruption. Emily looked back at Liam, her expression softening. "I'm not just his nanny or the housekeeper. I'm his mother, his biological mother." For a moment, Andrew didn't move. The words didn't register. Then they did, and he stepped back as if the room itself tilted. "What?" he said, stunned. Emily nodded. "I was pregnant when I was diagnosed with leukemia. I had no money, no family, and I knew I couldn't go through treatment and raise a child at the same time. I chose adoption because I wanted him to survive, because I didn't know if I would." Her voice cracked on the last words. She folded her hands, bracing herself for judgment. "I never wanted to disappear from his life," Emily continued, her voice steadier now but laced with pain. "After I went into remission, I started searching for him. I thought maybe I could just see him once from afar. But then I found out he'd been adopted by a woman who'd just died. And I thought, maybe this was my chance, just to be near him, just to make sure he was okay. I didn't plan on being hired, I needed to know he was safe." She shook her head and looked away. "And then he started reaching for me, smiling, calming when I sang. And suddenly, it wasn't just about me needing him. He needed me too, and I didn't know what to do." Andrew sat slowly in the chair across from her, his face unreadable. The silence stretched between them, heavy with realization. Emily continued, "I was scared to tell you. I thought you'd think I was trying to take him away. I wasn't. I swear I wasn't. I just wanted to be near him, even if he never knew who I really was." Her voice broke then, and she turned her face ashamed. Andrew ran a hand through his hair, still staring at her, like he was trying to piece her back together from every moment they'd shared. "You're telling me, all this time, you were right there, and I didn't know." He blinked slowly, trying to process the layers of her confession. "You carried him through cancer." Emily nodded silently. "You gave him up so he could live, even if it meant not being with you." She nodded again, tears falling now. "And then you came back, knowing you couldn't claim him just to help him smile." Her breath hitched as she managed, "Yes." Andrew looked over at Liam, who now slept in perfect peace, breathing softly, one tiny hand resting near his cheek. "You saved him before he was born," Andrew murmured, his voice distant. "And now, you're saving him again." He leaned forward, elbows on his knees. "I thought I was giving Rebecca the gift of motherhood. I never even asked who his birth mother was. That's how far removed I was from the process. I never imagined she'd be—" He looked at Emily again, shaking his head. "You." Emily wiped her eyes with the edge of her sleeve. "I didn't expect any of this. I was going to keep the secret forever. But when you called me tonight, when I saw him like that, I couldn't pretend anymore." Her voice trembled as she looked up at him. "I'm sorry if I've caused trouble or confusion. I was just trying to make something right, I guess." Andrew leaned back, digesting her words in silence. It wasn't anger on his face. It was something closer to guilt and awe. "I should have trusted my instincts," he muttered. "When I saw how he responded to you, I should have known there was more." Emily shook her head. "You couldn't have known. I made sure of that." Andrew's eyes dropped to his lap, then back to Liam. "No one's ever calmed him like that. Not me, not Rebecca, not even Linda." The name hung in the air for a second, but neither of them touched it. Not yet. Instead, Andrew looked back at Emily, his voice steadying. "You gave up your son to save his life, and now he sees you as the only safety he has left. I don't know what happens next, but I know one thing. He needs you." With the child finally calm, Emily can no longer hide. Sitting beside Andrew, she tells him everything: the diagnosis, the poverty, the impossible choice, the sleepless nights she has spent near her own son without being able to call him hers. Andrew listens, stunned, guilt rising in his chest as he realizes the woman he pushed away is the very person his son needs most. The first note came folded in half and slipped beneath Emily's bedroom door late one night. She found it the next morning when she went to fetch fresh linens. It was a scrap of paper torn from a notepad, the handwriting jagged and angry. "You don't belong here. You're a liar and a danger." No name, no signature, but the message was clear. Emily read it once, crumpled it and tossed it in the trash. But the second note came 2 days later. And then a third, tucked inside the laundry room cabinet, where only staff went. This one was more disturbing. "I know what you are. You don't fool me. Stay away from him." Emily's hands shook as she held the paper. There was no longer doubt. Linda. Her quiet glares. The way she lingered near Andrew, placing herself between him and Emily with subtle authority. The whispers to the kitchen staff. Emily hadn't wanted to believe it, too. She had tried to keep her head down, not make enemies. But now the threat was real. She took the notes to Andrew, who read them in silence, then looked up with something fierce in his expression. "We need to know who she really is," he said, jaw tight. Andrew hired a private investigator the next day, a retired cop with a talent for uncovering what people worked hard to bury. Within 72 hours, the man returned with a thick envelope. Emily sat beside Andrew as he opened it. Inside were files, testimonials, photographs. A trail of red flags stretching back years. Linda had worked for 3 other families, each time under glowing references that, when cross-checked, led to non-existent phone numbers. One case was particularly chilling. A young mother bedridden with a mysterious illness that resolved itself weeks after Linda left the household. Another involved a widower who accused Linda of trying to isolate him from his children. The common thread. She inserted herself into grieving families, became indispensable, and then subtly destabilized them from within. Andrew's face darkened as he read. "I trusted her," he muttered. "After Rebecca died, I thought she was the only one who understood." Emily laid a hand on his arm. "She fooled you because you were hurting," she said gently. "That's what people like her do." Andrew exhaled and stood. "If she's escalating, we can't just sit and wait." That's when his phone buzzed, a text message from an unknown number. "Come alone. I have the truth. 10:30 p.m. Not behind the pharmacy. Bring no one." The message was unsigned, but Andrew didn't need a signature. He read it aloud, and Emily's stomach turned to ice. "She's baiting you," Emily said. "It's a trap." But Andrew's eyes were already narrowed with resolution. "Which is exactly why I'm going," he said. Emily stood abruptly. "Then I'm coming too." He started to argue, but she cut him off. "She's unraveling. You don't know what she'll do. I won't sit at home waiting to find out you've been hurt." In the end, Andrew didn't fight her. The police were called. An undercover unit agreed to stake out the location in unmarked cars, blending into the city night. At 10:28, Andrew and Emily arrived at the lot behind the old pharmacy, Emily holding Liam wrapped tightly in a blanket against her chest. Rain had begun to fall, soft at first, then in heavy drops, as if the sky itself was warning them. The parking lot was nearly empty, just one flickering street lamp, one dark SUV, and Linda, standing like a spectre in the rain, drenched, trembling, and holding something shiny in her hand. It wasn't until Andrew stepped closer that he saw the glint of metal wasn't a weapon. It was a gas can, and her expression was far from rational. Linda's eyes locked on Andrew with manic intensity, and her voice sliced through the rain like a warning bell. "You brought her," she snapped, nodding at Emily. "You think she's pure. She's been lying to you since day one. She doesn't care about you or the baby. She only came back to steal what she gave away." Emily gripped Liam tighter, trying to steady her breath. Andrew stepped forward, palms open, trying to stay calm. "Linda, it's over. Whatever you think is happening, It isn't. No one betrayed you. Linda laughed, but it was hollow, unhinged. You were mine to save. I stayed when your wife died. I held that baby when no one else could. Her voice cracked with fury, and grief twisted into obsession. Then she lifted the gas can and stepped toward the car. If I can't have you, no one will. Her hand reached into her coat pocket. Andrew's breath caught. Linda, don't, he shouted. But then a blinding flash of light, police headlights, and the sound of running boots. Officers emerged from behind the parked vehicles. Drop it, one shouted. Linda froze, eyes wild. And then, with a scream of rage, she raised the lighter, only to be tackled before she could strike it. The moment was chaos. Emily turned Liam's face into her shoulder, shielding him as officers restrained Linda on the wet pavement. The gas can rolled away, spilling slightly, the acrid smell mixing with the rain. Linda screamed and sobbed, her voice no longer threatening but cracked with something pitiful, like a child who had been denied something she never earned. He was mine to save, she kept repeating. He was mine. Emily didn't speak. She just rocked Liam gently, whispering soothing nonsense against his ear as the baby stirred but didn't cry. Andrew stood frozen a moment longer, then walked to Emily and took her free hand in his. His grip was firm, grateful, wordless. The police confirmed Linda would be held for psychiatric evaluation and charges would follow. As they walked back to the car, soaked and silent, something passed between Andrew and Emily that hadn't been spoken, but was now understood. The danger was over. The darkness had crested. Now finally, there was room for healing. In the rain, Linda stood with a gas can, eyes wild. If I can't have you, no one will, she screamed, until flashing lights and strong hands pulled her back from the edge. The house, once weighed down by grief and echoing with unanswered cries, had found a rhythm again, not perfect, but human. The quiet that now filled its corners was not the hollow silence of loss, but the stillness that comes after healing. Liam had blossomed. The sickly, pale baby who once refused to eat and screamed in solitude now toddled barefoot across the hardwood floors, giggling, curious, clumsy in the most endearing ways. He babbled incessantly, nonsense most of the time, but increasingly threaded with recognizable words. Ball, more, up, and his personal favorite, uh-oh. Emily never missed a moment. She celebrated every tiny victory like it was monumental, because to her, it was. She had watched him waste away behind glass, aching to touch him. Now she held him, fed him, chased him through the halls. But nothing compared to what happened that soft afternoon in the den. Liam had climbed into her lap after a nap, still warm and sleepy, placed his chubby hands on her cheeks, looked into her eyes, and said it. Mama. The word was small, imperfect, but unmistakable. Emily froze, eyes filling instantly. Andrew, standing nearby with a book in his hand, felt the world tilt. He didn't speak. He couldn't. The next few minutes were suspended in something sacred. Emily blinked fast, willing herself not to scare Liam with her tears. She ran her fingers gently through his fine hair, kissed his forehead and whispered, "Yes, baby, Mama's here." Liam giggled and repeated it, more confident now, like the word had always been there, waiting. Mama! Andrew's chest felt like it might collapse from the weight of the moment. For all his money, all his power, he had never known how much a single word could mean. He walked over slowly and knelt beside them, watching the bond that had taken root in shadow finally bloom in daylight. He knows, Andrew said softly, voice shaking. He's always known. Emily looked at him, not needing to speak. The truth had long outgrown the need for explanation. They stayed like that for a while, just breathing together, Liam nestled between them like a bridge, between sorrow and hope, between past and future. Later that night, after Emily had put Liam to sleep, She went to the kitchen to wash his sippy cup and prep the next day's meals. Andrew walked in slower than usual, not with a business question or a schedule concern, but with a purpose, she felt, before he spoke. He didn't ask if she had a minute. He simply walked up to her and took her hand, fingers curling around hers, as if trying to say everything he hadn't found words for. Emily looked up, startled by the intensity in his eyes. He squeezed her hand. "You saved my son," he said, voice low. "And you saved me." She didn't answer immediately, because there was too much to say, and yet nothing at all that could match the weight of what they'd both lived through. Instead, she let his words settle in her chest, warm and steady. "I didn't save him," she finally whispered. "I just found my way back to him." Andrew studied her face, the scar near her collarbone from her port, the strength she never announced but carried with every movement. "You never stopped being his mother," he said, "even when no one knew." Emily smiled, but her eyes welled again. "I was terrified, Andrew, every day. I didn't know if I'd be here long enough for him to remember me." He nodded. "He'll never forget you." They stood there, hands still locked, a silence forming that wasn't awkward but full of knowing, of shared history, of something neither of them had expected to find. Weeks passed, then months. The seasons shifted, and so did the unspoken closeness between them. It wasn't rushed. There was no sudden romance, no grand declarations, only shared responsibilities, quiet moments, and growing trust. Andrew learned the difference between Emily's thoughtful silences and her worried ones. Emily learned to read the tension in Andrew's shoulders when he had a bad day at the firm. They co-parented without ever saying the word, but it was clear to anyone who entered the house they were becoming a family. Liam had stopped asking for anyone else. It was Emily who got him to nap. Emily he ran to when he fell. Emily who made him laugh until he hiccuped. Andrew watched it all unfold with reverence. He no longer saw her as the woman who had once walked into his home for a cleaning job. He saw her as the woman who rebuilt the heart of his home. And one evening, as they sat in the garden watching Liam stomp through puddles with a toy dinosaur, Andrew reached into his pocket and pulled out a small velvet box. "I don't want to hire help anymore," he said. "I want to build a life with you, as a family." Emily stared at him, mouth open, words caught behind the tidal wave of emotion rising inside her. "Andrew," she began, but he shook his head gently. "You don't owe me an answer right now," he said, "but I needed to say it. I needed you to know that I choose this, not out of gratitude, not out of duty, but because I see you and I love you." Her tears came then, silent and overwhelming. She said yes with a nod, then with a whisper, then again when she leaned into his chest and laughed through her crying. When they married months later, it was a small ceremony in the garden, under the same lights that once lit their confessions. There were no crowds, no photographers, only a few close friends, and of course, Liam. He waddled down the aisle in a miniature suit, holding the ring pillow upside down, laughing as everyone clapped. When he reached Emily and Andrew, he dropped the pillow, lifted his arms, and shouted, "Mama! Papa!" The words echoed louder than any vows, more sacred than any blessing. A new name for mother, a new chapter for them all, and at last, a promise fulfilled, carved out of pain, truth, and love. We poured our hearts into bringing this story to life, and we truly hope it touched yours. If it did, please consider subscribing to our channel. It means the world to us and helps us keep sharing more stories made with care, just for you. We're not just a channel, we're a community built on connection, emotion, and shared moments. Take a moment to explore our other videos, and don't hesitate to leave a comment. Your thoughts matter, and we love reading them. Thank you for being here with us. Your presence and support keep this journey going.